I have twins, and when they were little, they used to like to dress up like cowboys. That way, they were really into being cowboys. They loved everything about it. My mom had a horse, and so that was their life. And they used to put their little cowboy hats on, and then would look at me very seriously in my eyes, and they would say to me, "Tell me I'm a real cowboy." And I said, "You're a cowboy." They said, "No, tell me I'm a real cowboy." And I would say, "You are a real cowboy." And that story is a lot about, I think, sometimes we do need somebody to tell us that we're a real cowboy.
Yeah.
And I think that's what kind of mentorship and networks of other people that you can really feel comfortable with, so that you can help to validate each other in those times when you're feeling like maybe I don't belong in this space. And so from time to time, my friend will, when she sees me with those doubts, when we get these big plans, right? And we think, can I actually follow through with this? Or she'll say, "Marissa, you are a real cowboy."
I love it. I love it. I am going to remember that. And if you ever call me up with any doubts, I'll remind you. Cowboy. Yeah. I love it. Hello, and welcome back to The In Factor, where we explore what makes entrepreneurs tick, from their breakthrough ideas to the mindset that fuels their resilience and creativity. And if you've listened to the show for a while, you know that I've had the privilege of interviewing hundreds of entrepreneurs from all walks of life. And while they often share stories about what they built, how they got their first customer, raised funding, or scaled their company, what they really want to talk about and what they keep circling back to is mindset. Because at the end of the day, it's not just a strategy or the product that defines success. It's how entrepreneurs think, how they manage fear and uncertainty, how they persist after failure, and even how they stay grounded when they do find success. That's why I wrote my book, See, Do, Repeat, The Practice of Entrepreneurship. It's built on more than 2 decades of research, my own and that of other respected scholars. It offers a model for cultivating the skills and the competencies that shape an entrepreneurial mindset. From identifying value-producing opportunities to bouncing back after failure, mindset is the thread that weaves it all together. My guest today, Dr. Marissa Kaloga, understands this deeply. You see, this podcast was recorded in Indianapolis at the Global Entrepreneurship Congress, where I was invited to join other amazing scholars and supporters of entrepreneurship from all around the world. We had several days of networking and discussion that was focused on entrepreneurship and empowering entrepreneurs. I met Marissa at a dinner for several of us scholars from around the world, and I immediately connected with her and knew I wanted to share her story with my listeners. Marissa is a scholar whose work sits at the intersection of entrepreneurship, social innovation, and systems change. She currently leads the entrepreneurial belonging study in New Zealand. And as the Hynds Lecturer of Entrepreneurship at the University of Auckland Business School, she designs interdisciplinary curricula that bring together unlikely but powerful collaborators. Think music, global studies, and science all working together to come up with the best ideas, because that's where creativity usually sits, at the intersection of all those different perspectives and domains. Marissa brings a rich and varied background to this work. She's been a Fulbright Scholar in Guinea Conakry, a visiting scholar at the University of Pennsylvania, and director of STAR Lab, the Systems Transformation Action Research Lab. In our conversations, we talk about all this. And one moment that especially stayed with me was when Marissa shared a story about her young twin boys who wanted to be cowboys, and how important the power of mindset was to this. They knew that even at a very young age. It was a great reminder that the mental skills we build as entrepreneurs are also the ones that help us navigate life, from childhood through parenting, relationships, career changes, and reinvention. It's the idea that inspired my next book, in fact, which is focused on the mindset needed to move through major career or life transitions. Whether you're launching a new venture, shifting into a new field mid-career, or simply trying to build something bold and unfamiliar. So whether you're an aspiring founder, an experienced entrepreneur, or someone standing at the edge of a new chapter, I think you'll find a lot to reflect on today's episode. And stay tuned afterwards, and I'll share more about my book and how you can find out about it. Let's get into it. Here's my conversation with Dr. Marissa Kaloga. Welcome to the In Factor, conversations with entrepreneurs who started, stumbled, and succeeded. I'm Rebecca White, and I'm so excited because I'm here in Indianapolis at an amazing conference. It's the Global Entrepreneurship Congress, and there are people from all over the world here to talk about entrepreneurship. We've got educators, we've got individuals from entrepreneurial ecosystems, ecosystem builders, we've got entrepreneurs, and we're all here looking at entrepreneurship around the world and how we can all support and build entrepreneurial environments. And I'm very excited because I've got a new friend and guest with me here today, Marissa Kaloga. Thank you, Marissa. I botched that when I said it a minute ago. Marissa Kaloga. And Marissa is at the University of Auckland in New Zealand. And I met her last night. We're both here. We're going to be talking about our research, and she's doing she's going to be talking about AI and entrepreneurship. But I'm really fascinated by a lot of the things that she's done. She is a transdisciplinary faculty member and really focuses in on how to create more inclusive entrepreneurial ecosystems. And I found all of that very fascinating. So Marissa, thank you for joining me today on the In Factor.
It's been great to get to know you a little bit, Rebecca, and thanks for asking me to do this.
I feel like we have a new friendship here going. So Marissa, one of the things that really interested me is when we met last night, I learned you're from the United States, but you're now living in New Zealand, and you've been there for a while. And I'm really curious, your background, how did you make that decision to get into academics, to study entrepreneurship, to try to create more inclusive entrepreneurial ecosystems? Where did all that come from?
Yeah.
And how did you get from, was it Michigan?
Yeah,
Was it Michigan to New Zealand?
Yeah, so it's a long journey. I'll try to give you just the more interesting bits because with anything, there's always interesting parts and parts that you can just kind of curate out. So I grew up in Michigan, so I'm from Lansing, so home of GM. And ended up at Ohio State, did my undergraduate there, and then had 3 children. And so I was living my life and, as a new mom of 3 little ones, and it just I wasn't doing the things that I wanted to do. So I thought to go back to school. I went to one of my most trusted advisors and I said, what should I do for a graduate degree? And she said, do something where you can be useful. And so I ended up getting a Master of Social Work at the Ohio State University College of Social Work, focusing on macro social work, so community and social justice. So rather than kind of the individual kind of case social work, it's really more looking at community organizing, policy creation, kind of systemic factors that are creating issues and like how do they address them. But it kind of wasn't what I was looking for. And there was a conversation that I had with my husband. We were in the car and we were driving through campus, and I said, "What about a PhD?" I said, "I don't know about that. I don't know if that's for me." It wasn't something that I imagined for myself. And I'll never forget what he said. He said, "You know what, Marissa? All kinds of people have PhDs. Some of them are brilliant and some of them maybe not so much." He's like, "Well, just go ahead and give it a try." And I said, "Yeah, I guess that's true." So I ended up doing a PhD at Ohio State in social work as well, really focusing in on global health at that time. So I did a graduate interdisciplinary specialization in global health through the health sciences program as well. Really interested in kind of those social determinants of health, in particular how economic justice intersects with that. I've always been really focused on economic justice as kind of the material realities of inequality and how do you actually address those. So I did a as far as how I got interested in entrepreneurship, because it wasn't something that I necessarily planned on doing. I had a degree in business as well, but I had an internship at a microfinance institution. So it was a CDFI in Ohio that's been incredibly impactful for my entire career, called ECDI, the Economic and Community Development Institute. And when I was there, they were doing the work of inclusive entrepreneurship, had been doing it for a while. They currently have grown into the largest SBA intermediary microlender in the United States. So it is really quite an impactful organization. But I was able, through the internship, to get this firsthand understanding of what it takes to be an entrepreneur, how transformational that can be. And, there's literature out around emancipatory or empowering entrepreneurship. And that was really what I was seeing there before those things were written about. Right before the everyday entrepreneur became a thing we were talking about, I was seeing this in the restored citizens who were starting new companies, in the single mothers that were at a women's business center, in the resettled refugees that were starting up new businesses. And just seeing how high quality services were able to really provide that wraparound support and the access to capital to provide opportunities for people who are willing to do the work to do amazing things. And that's really what lit the fire in me to say, okay, this is actually a really important aspect of economic justice, is to create the enabling conditions for everyone to have a chance to move forward on that big idea that they have. So
I love all of that. I mean, there's so many things that you touched on that I have an interest in because of my own experience and the experience of others. Yeah. You first, one of the first things I want to go back to is just you had some doubts about your ability to get a absolutely. I remember those days. And, I have found that so many people, men and women, suffer with sort of an imposter syndrome.
Yeah.
And I can actually remember when I finished mine, I almost didn't feel, I remember one of my colleagues, female colleague, sent me flowers and I had just defended and I was like, I didn't really feel legitimate. Yeah.
Yeah.
And that imposter syndrome, so, I think it's kind of important to talk about it because a lot of times I've found that people look at me or my life and they think, oh, you've got it all figured out. But, I still struggle with that. And I think sometimes the more successful you are, the more you're challenged.
So
when
you're audacious, when you're willing to take the risk on and bet on yourself, it really means you're going out of your comfort zone. So to some degree, you don't know what you're doing, especially if you're a trailblazer. There isn't.
Well, that's the life of an entrepreneur too, right? See, I mean that's one of the other things, that I've found in all the interviews that I've done with entrepreneurs over the years. And in my own experience is that you don't have to know it all. And in fact, you won't.
Yeah.
Because where you think you're headed is often not where you end up, which is exactly what happened with you because entrepreneurship found you along the way.
Yeah. Well, there's one thing I have to tell you the story. So I have twins, and when they were little, they used to like to dress up like cowboys. That way, they were really into being cowboys. They loved everything about. My mom had a horse, and so that was their life. And they used to put their little cowboy hats on, and then would look at me very seriously in my eyes, and they would say to me, "Tell me I'm a real cowboy." And I said, "You're a cowboy." They said, "No, tell me I'm a real cowboy." And I would say, "You are a real cowboy." And that story is a lot about, I think, sometimes we do need somebody to tell us that we're a real cowboy.
Yeah.
And I think that's what kind of mentorship and networks of other people that you can really feel comfortable with so that you can help to validate each other in those times when you're feeling like maybe I don't belong in this space. And so from time to time, my friend will when she sees me with those doubts, when we get these big plans, right? And we think, can I actually follow through with this? Or she'll say, Marissa, you are a real cowboy.
I love it. I am going to remember that. And if you ever call me up with any doubts, I'll remind you. Cowboy. Yeah. I love it. And well, it's interesting because in a lot of experiences of my own life, other people have seen possibilities in me that I didn't see in myself.
Yeah.
And so I'm very grateful. You mentioned networks, and that's another area that I'm very passionate about. I've done a lot of research in entrepreneurial mindset and competency base, using competencies to understand so that we can measure entrepreneurial mindset. And, I wrote a popular press book about my model, and the last chapter was Choose Yourself.
Yeah.
And it really came from an interview that I had with an entrepreneur on this podcast, actually. And he said he decided to choose himself, not to wait for somebody else to choose him. And he was in the entertainment space, where that used to be the norm. You know, you had to be discovered. But I love that so much, and I've understood that it's something that a lot of people need to hear, because they're doubting themselves, or they put the needs of other people.
Yeah.
And sometimes you have to do that. I mean, you're a mom, you know that.
Yeah. Yeah.
Sometimes you had to deal with those little cowboys, right? But you know, that to step out, take that risk, and choose ourselves. That's, as you said, that's transformational.
Absolutely. Yes.
And I love so your passion for what you're doing. You're turning something you love into a purpose in service of others, and I think that's very powerful. But I would love to talk about that transformational nature of entrepreneurship.
Yeah.
That's so powerful. And, you know, I met one of your colleagues. She runs the center there.
Kim and South.
Yes, Kim. And Kim, and I asked Kim because Kim came from the business world into the academic space to help build the center. You have a new center there, by the way. What's the name of it?
So the center is Center for Innovation and Entrepreneurship. So it's been around for a few years. So Darcel Keene is the director, and so she's been working on building and expanding and refining the model for a while as well. And the academic director for CIE is Professor Rod McNaught, who's at University of Auckland as well.
Okay, it really sounds exciting, and I want to get to New Zealand in a few minutes.
Yeah,
what's happening?
I got to New Zealand.
Yeah.
We haven't answered that.
We haven't answered that yet.
Sorry, too.
So I want to know that. But I want to talk a little bit about this, this whole idea of transformation and change. And in your opinion, when you think about it, you know, how do you feel like the work that you do and the work that any of us can do, and maybe an entrepreneur out there or an academic, how do we help people move along that transformational path? You know, how do we help them take that first step? Because that's often the hardest.
Yeah, I mean, there's so many answers to that question, and I think the beautiful part is that you can do this at lots of different levels, right? So some people who maybe have a lot of power and influence can do that through really thoughtful policy creation. Other people can do it through, you know, organizational leadership. And other people can do it through interpersonal interactions. And yet you can also do it through a lot of internal work. Because being the model yourself and doing the work yourself to feel empowered in that way can be very inspirational, just walking the walk. I know that's been the case for me with a lot of the entrepreneurs that I've had the honor of working with, just being inspired by their willingness, like you said, to choose themselves. But I think if we're thinking around the work that I do in kind of the ESO space, the entrepreneurial support organizations and that ecosystem, it comes in a lot of different ways. In my professional role, so I was the director of innovation for ECDI, the organization that I talked about before. So I co-created that position with the president and CEO of ECDI after my PhD because I desperately wanted to work with them. Some job crafting.
I love it. Yeah. Very academic entrepreneurship. Right?
Absolutely. And one of the things that I did was leading the Women's Business Centers. There's lots of WBCs around the United States. And so ECDI has, I think, 4 or 5 of them across a couple of different cities. And it's attending to the person, not just the business, right? Because we know that the founder wellness is such an important part of this startup. Right? It is so much a part of kind of who they are, and it's not just a business endeavor. There's some soul to it as well. And so a lot of what we're doing at the WBC was supporting people to sometimes find childcare, find housing assistance. So there was that aspect of it that was really important, to be able to get them to a space where they were able to concentrate on building something, on being creative. Because when we're in that survival mindset, we're not in a creative mindset. We're not really possible to have both. We're reacting rather than planning for the future. So tending to the person, allowing them to move into that space of creation, or into that space where you're willing to take a thoughtful and calculated risk. In particular, working with people who maybe don't come from a lot of privilege, it's important to tend to that, because I think entrepreneurs themselves, moving, the barriers aside, can take care of their business themselves, right? Getting some advice, is of course necessary, but to me, a lot of it is around what can we get out of your way so that you can move forward faster.
Yeah. I'm sure, I know you're familiar with Mike Morris and the work that he does up at Notre Dame. And I happen to have him on my podcast and have worked with him for many years. And, when we talked about entrepreneurship and poverty and his goal of helping people out of poverty with entrepreneurship, he brought up this very issue, that there were often, elements of life that were in the way, and helping get those out of the way is huge. Well, I love what you're doing, and you're in Australia. So
New Zealand.
New Zealand. Where did that come from? That's two faux pas for me today. But yes, you're down under, but you're in New Zealand. And so tell me how you got to New Zealand. And
So I was working at ECDI after my PhD, mostly because I did my dissertation work in my husband's country in West Africa, in Guinea. And when I was working with women's cooperatives and kind of learning from them around how they structured their organizations. And everyone was asking me, why are you doing this? Which is a very big question for a research participant to ask. And so I said, well, the way that you organize is something that I don't see in my community, and really trying to learn from you, and that we want to build similar types of organizations. And so after that, I came back to Ohio, and I thought, well, I should go into practice because I made a promise. And so I was able to help to co-create some programs at ECDI, but I had the opportunity to apply for a Fulbright. And so I ended up getting the Fulbright and spent some time back in Guinea again, looking at entrepreneurial ecosystems and financial inclusion there. I was able to take the whole family, and they spent a lot of time with their cousins. And so it was a really wonderful experience for everyone. And while we were over there, we're kind of deciding what's next. Are we going to stay here for a while? Are we going to go back to the U.S.? And a job came open at University of Otago, which is at the far south part of the South Island in New Zealand, in the social and community work department. And they were interested in somebody to teach community development and organizational development from that human services lens. I went there for a week and absolutely fell in love with the city and the country. And we decided to relocate there.
that's amazing.
Yeah.
That's amazing. Neither of you from New Zealand.
No, neither of us from New Zealand, but both of us, I guess, willing to take a chance.
Yeah. So how old were your children at that time?
Oh, gosh. So the youngest, I think, was 8, and the older ones were 12. Yeah.
And how did they react to that?
Oh, they said, did they speak English? And I said, yes. And they said, do they have a McDonald's? And I said, yes. And they said, okay, sign us up. We're okay to go. Because where we were living, we were speaking French, and
Right.
no McDonald's either.
Yeah.
So the two things I think they missed the most during the Fulbright.
That's great. That's great. I love it. Kids, they always get to the heart of things.
Heart of things, yeah.
So let's talk about New Zealand and what's going on there. I think you described the entrepreneurial ecosystem there and the culture and the mindset around the entrepreneurship as being aspiring.
Yeah.
The country is focused, and the university systems are more focused on entrepreneurship now.
Absolutely.
And but yet there's still a lot of work to be done. But
Yeah.
talk to us about, what is the mindset around entrepreneurship there? I have a former student in Finland, and in Finland, she's frustrated because they don't share stories like we do here in the United States, and they don't have that same kind of mindset around entrepreneurship as a career.
Yeah.
And I'm curious, how do New Zealanders think about entrepreneurship?
Yeah, so I'm gonna take it back just one step.
Okay.
So I think it's important to provide some context for what it's like in New Zealand. So it's more different than it might seem on the face of it. So New Zealand has another name, which is Aotearoa. So that's the Te Reo Māori name for New Zealand. So Māori and English and sign language are the official languages. So we have multiple official languages. And
so your children learn all of those in school?
Some in school. Everybody learns a certain degree of tikanga and protocol so that we can understand the multiple cultures of New Zealand. But New Zealand is considered a bicultural country. So it's founded on a treaty, the Treaty of Waitangi, that was signed both by the UK and the Maori chiefs. So that is the founding document of the country. So the country has, since its inception, had to navigate what that means. And it has navigated it differently in different time periods. And we're seeing now it's still a dynamic conversation about how do we honor the treaty. So that underlies really whatever happens in New Zealand. So when we think about entrepreneurship, it's important also to think that there is more than one way of approaching it. Right. So as we think of New Zealand as having not just kind of, the business sector and the public sector and the nonprofit sector, we also have the Maori economy that operates on a different set of internal logics, really putting social and environmental value creation right next to economic value creation, a lot of cooperative ownership structures. And so it creates an entrepreneurial environment that incorporates that as well. And something that the business school at University of Auckland is embedding into the curriculum as well.
Fascinating.
Yeah.
That's really interesting.
Absolutely. So when we think about entrepreneurship, it would be important to talk about what's happening in both kind of worldviews about what entrepreneurship is and how we are able to move forward. And I think it's in particular important because the Maori economy in New Zealand is growing quite fast. We saw that there's a latest report from Burrell talking about what has happened in the last few years. We had 17 billion in 2018 as the Maori economy, and it's 32 billion in 2023.
Wow.
And we're also seeing that as far as sectors, it's moving from primarily agriculture and forestry into now scientific and technical services and professionals. So we're seeing that multiple value creation model that has been really emblematic of the Maori economy is starting to show that can work. And I think that's a really big contribution of entrepreneurship in New Zealand, is to say we can actually have the triple bottom line and have it be functional and have it be an entire kind of economic sector.
Yeah.
But entrepreneurship in New Zealand is a bit different. We have something called the kind of number 8 wire mentality, which is kind of, you can kind of, in the US we call it MacGyvering. So sometimes doing things without like proper resourcing, just kind of making sure you can get by.
Yeah.
And it's a double-edged sword, right? So on one hand, it means that people are just going to give it a go. But sometimes it can also mean a little bit of difficulty in scaling.
Yeah.
Sure, if you don't have that kind of foundation.
So they bootstrap and they build in an evolutionary way, or and sometimes with certain, especially when you get into technology, sometimes that won't work, and when you're to scale.
Yeah, we are seeing some really interesting developments in tech sectors there. Yeah. So we have an emerging space tech sector. We have rock space. Yeah. So space programs are starting to look really interesting. We've got Rocket Labs.
And you're launching rockets there?
So Rocket Labs launches a lot of satellites.
Okay.
We have quite a few that go up out of New Zealand, and there's a lot of interest in that space. We have some ag tech as well. A very agricultural country.
Right.
So there's a lot of
more sheep than people, right?
Yeah, it's more sheep than people, and they're very happy in their pastures. So we have that, some medical things as well, biotech. So there's a lot.
You've got wineries too, right?
Yes, especially in Otago region. Yeah, down south, some very, very good wineries. So a lot of technology around that as well. So there's really interesting things happening, and the government is taking note of that and really focusing in on what we can do to bolster what's already happening and start to expand it. So New Zealand has the potential to have a broader impact than it does currently. The ecosystem, and Dave Moskowitz is the Gen NZ chair, and he does a really great job of bringing people together. So the ecosystem, I would say, is very accessible. People are very willing to take a meeting, respond to a phone call. So if there's an entrepreneur in New Zealand that wants to get started, it's not hard to find somebody to support you.
That's great.
And that's something that I think is pretty special about the place.
Yeah. When you think about a country like that and you've got those two cultures,
Yeah.
do they interact well? Over the years, have there been a lot of challenges with the different perspectives, and has a lot of that resolved, or is that still?
It's an ongoing conversation, right? So we have the Waitangi Tribunal that is the kind of legal mechanism to resolve some of those conflicts. But it's a dynamic conversation. And one of the things I find really interesting about it is that we have the same types of things happening in lots of countries. It's maybe not as obvious. In New Zealand, I think it's a really important kind of global example of how do you start to blend ontologies? What does it mean to have an indigenous worldview and a kind of a Western worldview together? How do you accommodate space for both of those? There have been tremendous challenges. There's been a lot of inequality in the country. There's been dispossession in the country, and there's been some reconciliations as well. And so it's definitely an ongoing conversation. There's the idea of, of Maori sovereignty, which impacts quite a bit in the AI space, and data sovereignty. So it's ongoing, right? Certainly it's not a final conversation, and hopefully it leads to more empowerment, and more, again, reconciliation.
Yeah, sometimes those difficult conversations, if handled well, can move us all forward. I mean, in the United States, we're very divided right now.
Yeah.
And we have been for a while, and it's been coming. And so, I think worldwide, these are important issues. How do we get people to talk to each other and consider each other's perspective in a respectful way, and not assume that we always not assume dogmatism. It's the way that's with our perspective. It's interesting because we talk about entrepreneurship as transformational.
Yeah.
And in New Zealand, talking about the economy growth, that's amazing.
Absolutely.
And some of the areas you mentioned, of course, in ag tech and other areas that might be more logical space, I didn't think about. How about AI there? What is the mindset around AI? We kind of talked about that a little bit.
Yeah. So recent reports have shown that New Zealand, as a country, the population is highly distrustful of AI, and maybe is not, as a population, as excited about embracing AI. That isn't to say that there aren't absolute champions and people leading in that space. There definitely are. But as a general population, it's not like everybody's rushing to implement it or integrate it. And I would say that's maybe that cautious approach is pretty typical, right? But it's also, again, a unique place where there's additional concerns, right? One of the things that I think is really interesting is that you may know that in New Zealand, we were able to have personhood for a couple of natural features. So a tree, a river has legal personhood, a mountain. And that being precedent is a really interesting question for AI.
I can only imagine.
Yeah, so if we think about what does that mean, because similarly there are questions around like Maori culture or tikanga Maori, and Maori data, and the type of sovereignty and protections that those have. Well, how does that intersect with AI? And certainly we have Maori leaders in New Zealand who are part of AI task force, and some very pro-AI and some anti-AI. In general, population-wise, the statistics are showing that Maori are less trustful of AI even than the general population. So there's people kind of across the spectrum on AI currently. So it's an open conversation.
Yeah. That's a really interesting one. I'm interested also in the whole intellectual property side of AI, and I know in the United States that's definitely evolving. I think in the EU there's a little bit more definition around it. How about that in New Zealand? Not just with AI, but in general, the whole process for entrepreneurs. If they have intellectual property to protect, how does that work in New Zealand? Is that pretty advanced and sophisticated, like the U.S., or are you still evolving there?
I would say it's still evolving in a specific direction. We have fairly good IP protection rights, certainly very strong copyright laws. There is interest from the country in looking at a kind of academic-owned IP model called the Waterloo model, and so they're really currently investigating what that might be like in New Zealand for academics and researchers to own their own IP and be able to commercialize it themselves. So that's something that we're actively investigating, and I think there's a lot of excitement around what that might mean. There's also the challenge of collectively owned intellectual property in Indigenous populations.
Right, because that's the history. A lot of the islands, right? I know in the South Pacific, a lot of the islands, the collective ownership is.
Yeah. And so navigating what that looks like, and then adding in the AI component of it.
Yeah.
It's definitely a dynamic and open conversation. So I don't think it's really settled fully.
Lots of exciting things going on there. So, for someone that wanted to be involved in some of the programs that you've got at the University of Auckland, I mean, who do you serve with those programs? Is it mostly students?
Yeah, so the Center for Innovation and Entrepreneurship does co-curricular programming. So that's going to be things that are non-credit bearing. So we have a wonderful student-led program called Velocity, which is kind of an ideas challenge into kind of a pitch competition. A very, very well engaged and a very talented team of students that collaborates with CIE to be able to deliver that. So we do a lot with students, but we also have the Doctoral Entrepreneurial Leadership Program, which isn't necessarily that you have to come in with an idea and be able to build a company, but it's more about developing to what you've written about, the entrepreneurial mindset and what that means for either an academic or a researcher across the career. And similarly, we have also the Research to Innovation Hatchery, which is more around people coming through with an idea and being able to build that out and potentially work with Uni Services, which is the kind of commercialization arm of the University of Auckland, to be able to build that into a company.
Yeah, that sounds interesting. Now, in your own research, so tell me some of the most interesting and exciting things that you're working on now that you really, that you're curious about, or where you'd like to have an impact.
Absolutely. So my area of interest is in inclusive entrepreneurial ecosystems, both kind of theoretically, but also in kind of a more community engaged applied approach. And really that comes from my practice experience, as often our research questions do, and being able to see that when services truly are designed for kind of underserved populations and are high quality, that you see similar outcomes, right? So currently I have a study that's funded by a research center at the University of Auckland called Junctures, Dialogues on Inclusive Capitalism. So it's really exploring kind of beyond shareholder supremacy, what are other ways that we might re-envision our economic model, what are other types of capitalism. And so they're a very, I would say, very open-minded and diverse perspective.
Now, when you think of types of capitalism, what are you referring to?
So we can think of like neoliberal capitalism as being kind of a variant, but we can also look at, for example, the Maori economy that is very much around preserving land and making sure that we're not looking only at a financial return, but really looking at what's best for the people. And we can also look kind of at that emerging social and solidarity economy as kind of a variant. We still have that market mechanism, but people are organizing in different ways and looking at different ways of reimagining value creation. We can look at who are the stakeholders and how are we responding to them in our economy. So rather than just shareholders, looking at that stakeholder approach. So it's, there's lots of different ways of looking at it. I don't think there's a singular perspective at the center. It's more of let's open up this dialogue to be able to have those really tricky conversations. So the research that's being funded is in a lot of those kind of more interdisciplinary areas. So the work that I'm doing right now is an entrepreneurial belonging study. So I'm really interested in developing a theory of entrepreneurial belonging. So we know about inclusive.
So what does that mean for our listeners? What would entrepreneurial belonging?
Well, we're trying to figure out what that means. Okay. So the study is looking at inclusion. So I'm doing a social network analysis of the relationships between all of the entrepreneurial support organizations in New Zealand. Really looking at who is working with who, how are those relationships structured? Are there any specific emblematic network structures that indicate certain behavior in that system? But complementing that, we're doing a lot of interviews with diverse founders and folks that work at ESOs to try to understand what is that. So when we think about inclusion, we might be thinking about policy for a large part of it, or access. And those things may make someone included, but it doesn't make someone feel like they belong.
Yeah.
So all of us had the same experiences of maybe being in a friend group where they include you in their plans, but you get there and you don't really feel like you fit in. And a lot of entrepreneurs feel that way. The services, they have certain outcomes, and those outcomes tend to benefit certain demographics of people or people with certain life experiences. And we say that systems create what they are intended to create, that we will see more of the same if we really have the same systemic factors. So the belonging aspect of it is that the subjective experience of the entrepreneurs is very important, because if people don't feel like those services are for them, we're not going to engage in it.
Yeah, and that's a tough one too. You can do all the right things, and somebody still may have that internal perspective, and so I guess you have to bring that out. You have to somehow find that out, because you don't always know. Going back to that friend group, you don't always know that somebody doesn't feel like they belong, and a lot of times that comes from things that maybe we don't even recognize that we're doing, right? To leave others out.
Yeah.
We don't. It's not conscious sometimes.
Yeah, for a large degree of it, people go by the status quo, and that might feel comfortable for them, and it might be very uncomfortable for someone else.
I'm curious. I wanted to ask about investors in New Zealand, because you've got this really unique environment, the sort of indigenous collective mindset and then the more Western mindset.
Yeah.
And what you're talking about kind of feels to me like it's drawing from both. And maybe you're just like in the perfect place there in New Zealand. But do you have a strong network of investors there, or are you finding investors coming from the U.S. or other places to fund a lot of the high growth technology?
Maybe a both and.
Okay.
So the investors in New Zealand are a very friendly group, very accessible. And from what I know, and I am not an entrepreneur, so this is all secondhand knowledge, but I have been really supportive, in particular, of early stage founders. I think the difficulty in that space is mostly the proximity issue. So we're small. There's only 5 million people in New Zealand, and we're far from a lot of things. So what we see is that a lot of times our kind of up-and-comers will go overseas
It's a little isolated.
to be able to seek, second, third round.
And probably to get talent too.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, we have a lot of talent. I would say, we recently at the university held kind of a startup careers expo, and there was an incredible amount of students who want to work in that space. So I think that yes, there's a certain degree of looking offshore for talent, but there is a lot that's already in New Zealand. It's a very highly talented population of people. Yeah. But to your point around the different kind of worldviews around entrepreneurship, we also have some really impactful impact investing. Jamie Newth, who used to be a lecturer at University of Auckland Business School, has recently left to be the CEO of Soul Capital, which is an impact investing firm. So there's things that are happening in that space as well that I think are really exciting in New Zealand.
Yeah, it's just fascinating, and I'm particularly interested, I think, because I met you, but also because just some of the elements that you deal with, being somewhat isolated, being smaller, and I love the sort of scrappiness that you have to be,
because sometimes you can't get what you need right away.
Yeah. And of course, this is a completely different situation, but a few years back, I went to Cuba, and the entrepreneurial mindset there. It was everybody was selling something, doing something entrepreneurial, and it's there's that necessity entrepreneurship that arises, which is, I think, a whole other area that we could spend a lot of time talking about. This has been a really interesting conversation. I love it. I think we could talk for a lot longer, but we've got a conference here, so much going on, so many people here. I don't know if you have anything else you want to add about your research or the work that you're doing that I didn't ask you about. But I always love to, I've got a couple of questions I want to ask you at the end, but is there anything else I should have asked you that you'd love to talk about?
Well, I would like to mention, so my position at the University of Auckland Business School is officially called the Hynds Lecturer of Entrepreneurship. So it's funded by the Hynds Foundation, which is a family foundation, and they've been really supportive of the business school, and in particular of CIE, the Center for Innovation and Entrepreneurship.
That's wonderful.
Supporting them across a couple of different programs. So the curricular work that I do and the teaching work that I do through Hynds is to take innovation and entrepreneurship out of the business school and to co-create curriculum that is in the language and lens of the discipline I'm partnering with.
Oh, fascinating. Yeah.
And so that's a part of a larger interest in the university. The tagline for the university is this global powerhouse of innovation, creativity, and entrepreneurship. And they're really trying to make good on that by creating opportunities for students to engage in things like developing an entrepreneurial mindset or looking at what does innovation look like in their discipline. And really breaking kind of open the egg and saying, well, it can be a lot of different things. Let's explore what all the facets of this are, because it's certainly, we like entrepreneurship. We started in one place, and you're talking about the, everyday entrepreneurs and the necessity entrepreneurs. We're starting to see that there is so much more that's out there to learn. So I'm teaching into global studies, social entrepreneurship and systems change from that global perspective. And also teaching into the School of Music and a music entrepreneurship class, looking at what does it mean to be innovative in the arts and what does entrepreneurship look like when you're trying to curate a creative vision. What are you willing to do? What are you not willing to do? And so that's kind of something that the university is trying to.
So I knew we had a lot in common because back in 1999, when I was starting in this whole field, that was really my focus. And I come from a business training background. My doctorate's in strategic management, but most of the entrepreneurs that I've known in my life have come from somewhere else. My mom was my inspiration, and she was an artist. So I remember one of the first actually, it was a column that I wrote for the newspaper when I was in Cincinnati, and it was about this very thing, that entrepreneurship was important for every major. And that's been sort of a focus, to include those other disciplines. And, we've done it with some success, but it's also been a challenge because of the way the way universities are structured and the way courses and degrees are structured. So I love what you're doing there, and I think that's phenomenal. So I always end by asking my guests if they had one piece of advice for someone out there listening. Most of my entrepreneurs are most of my interviews are practicing entrepreneurs, but I love bringing in experts like you to talk about the research and the things that are going on. And based on, your passion, your interest, what you're working on, if you had one piece of advice for entrepreneurs out there listening, what would it be?
Yeah. I think it would be to figure out what's important to you and be really clear on that, what your priorities are before things hit the fan. Right?
Proverbial.
Yeah.
It's the fan.
Yeah. Because when you're in that space of, oh my gosh, everything just, went sideways on me and I don't know what to do. If you don't have that really clear sense of this is what's most important, this is my priority, this is what I can let go, it can feel really overwhelming. And that's something that's kind of guided me throughout my career of what are my values, what is most important to me, and letting that be the framework for me to make decisions, in particular in times of crisis.
Yeah, I think that's great advice for all of us, regardless, but especially for entrepreneurs, because it will be chaotic, it will be scary.
Yeah.
Things will not go the way, we didn't talk about failure, which is something I always talk about, but failure is a big part of the journey to success in anything. And so knowing yourself and knowing what you stand for and believe in and knowing what you're passionate about really matters. So thank you for sharing that. So where can our listeners find out more about the work you're doing or the university or, you connect with you?
Yeah, absolutely. I think the easiest way to connect with me is going to be via LinkedIn. I'm pretty easy to find on LinkedIn. I think I'm the only Marissa Kaloga out there. And then I would encourage everyone who is interested in what I'm talking about to pop over to the University of Auckland website. You can look at the Center for Innovation and Entrepreneurship. Equally, the Junctures website has really interesting information with the other research that's happening there.
Yeah. You might get some students out of it.
Yeah, be friends with it.
Marissa, thank you for joining me.
Thanks so much for having me. This was a great conversation.
Yeah, it was. Well, that was Dr. Marissa Kaloga. What a thoughtful and important conversation. I loved how she tied mindset not just to entrepreneurship, but to belonging and even parenting. It's a reminder that how we think, how we train our minds to respond to uncertainty, rejection, and opportunity is central to creating a meaningful and sustainable path forward, both in business and in life. If you enjoyed today's episode and want to explore more about the entrepreneurial mindset, check out my book, See, Do, Repeat, The Practice of Entrepreneurship. You can find it, my other books, the backlist of InFactor podcasts, and more at my website. That's drrebeccawhite.com, drrebeccawhite.com. And there you'll also find out more about my new book, Choose Yourself Groups, which dives into how to navigate major transitions with courage, clarity, and companionship. As always, thanks for listening to The InFactor. I'm Dr. Rebecca White. See you next time.